The door just slammed shut, and the clock is now ticking. At exactly 10 a.m. this morning, the Supreme Court of the United States issued an order that legal experts are calling the final nail in the coffin of a year-long legal battle that has captivated the nation. What happened in that marble courthouse today wasn't just another ruling, it was the legal equivalent of flipping a switch that sets an irreversible process into motion. And here's what nobody is talking about. There's a specific 48-hour window that was triggered the moment that order was signed, a procedural countdown that ends with consequences that will reshape American political history. If you've been following this case, if you've felt the frustration of watching delay after delay, appeal after appeal, then what I'm about to tell you will finally make sense of why this moment is different from every other moment that came before it. For months, the legal maneuvering has been relentless. Every time it seemed like the case was moving forward, another filing appeared, another motion, another attempt to pump the brakes on what many believed was inevitable. But today, something fundamental changed. The Supreme Court didn't just reject an appeal, they terminated the stay. In legal terms, this is called the issuance of mandate. And if you're not familiar with that phrase, let me explain why it matters more than any headline you'll read tonight. When a higher court issues its mandate, it's the formal notification that their work is finished and jurisdiction has returned to the lower court. It's not theoretical. It's not subject to interpretation. It's a court mandate, the legal equivalent of removing every single roadblock that's been standing between the prosecution and the courtroom. For prosecutors who have spent decades building cases, this is the moment they wait for. It's the moment when the law is finally, unequivocally, permitted to take its course without interference, without delay, without another avenue for obstruction. Let me walk you through the pattern, because patterns tell you everything you need to know about strategy. In June, the defense filed a motion claiming absolute immunity. The argument was brazen. A president should be entirely beyond the reach of criminal law, shielded by the office itself, regardless of the actions taken while in power. The district court examined that claim and said no. Then in August, they went to the appeals court with essentially the same argument, just repackaged. They were asking for what amounts to a get-out-of-jail-free card for anything classified as an official act. The answer, once again, was no. This third attempt, the final appeal to the Supreme Court, was the last possible line of defense. And here's the critical part. They weren't just seeking a favorable ruling. The evidence shows they were seeking delay. Every filing, every motion, every procedural maneuver was strategically designed to push the trial date past the election, to ensure that a jury of American citizens would never get the chance to hear the facts before voters went to the polls. When you look at the timeline, when you read the actual court filings that are part of the public record, you see a defense team that was systematically running out of road. One of their central arguments was that a president must be impeached and convicted by Congress before they can be prosecuted in criminal court. It's a claim with zero basis in the Constitution, a creative interpretation that legal scholars across the political spectrum have debunked. But it didn't matter whether the argument had merit. What mattered was that it bought time. Today, the highest court in the land effectively ended that fiction. The rejections at every level were unanimous. The legal logic was clinical, methodical, and definitive. And now that the Supreme Court has said no for the final time, the case moves from the marble halls of the highest court in America back to the district court, where the original warrant was issued. So where does this leave us right now, at this exact moment in time? It leaves us with a very specific administrative process that most people don't understand, but absolutely should. You've probably heard the term issuance of mandate thrown around on the news without much explanation. Here's what it actually means in plain terms. When the Supreme Court rejects a final appeal, they don't just announce their decision and move on. There's a formal communication that takes place between the Supreme Court clerk and the district court. This isn't done by email. This is official legal documentation that gets processed through specific channels, and there's a timeline attached to it. In the next 48 hours, that mandate will be received by the lower court, and the moment it is, the stay that has been holding the case in legal limbo dissolves. Think of it like a dam breaking. Once that happens, the district court judge has immediate authority to reinstate the trial calendar and, crucially, to authorize the execution of any pending orders. That includes the processing of an arrest warrant. Now, I want to be very clear about how this works because there's a lot of confusion and speculation out there. The U.S. Marshals and the Secret Service have already been in coordination. They don't wait for the news cycle to catch up. They wait for the paperwork to be processed through the proper legal channels. Once that 48-hour administrative window closes and the mandate is officially docketed in the court system, the warrant becomes live. This isn't a sign of hesitation or uncertainty. This is the sound of the legal system working exactly as it was designed to work. It ensures that when the law moves, it moves with absolute procedural integrity, that every step is documented, that every protocol is followed, that there's no room for challenge based on technical error. These are the final 48 hours of what has been a year-long stall. I know what some of you are thinking right now. You're wondering if there's another way to delay, another legal trick that could be pulled out of the hat at the last second. It's a fair question, especially given everything we've witnessed over the past year. But here's the answer based on the actual evidence and the structure of the American legal system. There are no more appeals left. The door is locked. The Supreme Court was the final stop, and they've declined to intervene. There is no higher authority to appeal to. There is no procedural mechanism left to exploit. The legal road has reached its end. What's happening now is a transition from the administrative to the foundational, from the mechanics of court filings to the very survival of our constitutional framework. If this final appeal had been granted, the implications would have extended far beyond this single case. The law would have changed, not just for one person, but for every citizen. Think about what the defense was actually asking for. They were requesting a world where a president could commit crimes while in office, use the powers of that office as a shield, and never have to face accountability in a courtroom. They were asking for a system where one person stands above the law, where the office of the presidency becomes a form of legal immunity rather than a position of public service. They were asking, in effect, for a king rather than a president. In 3 decades of experience in federal prosecution, this type of legal overreach appears only in the most extreme cases, usually involving organized crime figures or deeply corrupt officials who believe they've bought their way out of the system. But the principle at stake here goes beyond any individual. It's the bedrock of democracy itself. It's the concept of equal justice under law. No one is above the law. Not presidents, not billionaires, not anyone. By rejecting this appeal, the court ensured that a critical precedent remains intact. The office of the presidency is a duty, a responsibility to the American people, not a license to break the law. If that precedent had crumbled, if the court had granted immunity for criminal acts committed while in office, no citizen would truly be protected by the rule of law. But today, the system held. The law is clear, and the path to accountability is now wide open. Justice moves slowly, but when it's built on solid ground, when every appeal has been heard and every argument considered, it becomes nearly impossible to overturn. That's why this took time. That's why it will last. The system works when everyone does their job. The grand jury did theirs, the prosecutors did theirs, and today the Supreme Court did theirs. The stay is gone. The 48-hour clock is running. And what comes next will prove that in America, the facts still matter and the Constitution still governs.